When I look at that bridge, I see the impossible become possible.
A 6-mile span.
There was no precedent for building a suspension bridge at that length at that time.
These men running across this chain link fence.
And the biggest machines on Earth.
It was like being a little kid again.
This is mind-blowing stuff.
From triumph to tragedy.
The upper deck collapsed into lower deck.
And back again.
The clock is ticking. Every movement is orchestrated like a ballet.
Is this how we should do bridges of the future?
How they built the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. I'm Stuart Varney, and this is American Built. When the Transcontinental Railroad reached the West Coast, it stopped in Oakland, California. San Francisco was still 7 miles west across the bay. The story of how they bridged that divide is one that spans generations. It's a tale of tenacity, tragedy, and ultimately triumph. San Francisco was built at the end of a peninsula in the middle of the bay.
San Francisco in early 20th century, it's booming. I mean, it's bursting at the seams, and as more and more people moved into the Bay Area, the only viable way to get in and out of San Francisco was the ferry system.
So then you have this massive crossing, and how are you going to bridge it? How are you going to bring San Francisco into what's happening with the rest of the Bay Area? And we had to be creative.
The bay was wide, and the ground beneath it unpredictable.
San Francisco's worried about earthquakes because it sits on a major fault line. It's one of the most seismically active cities on the planet. And this particular bridge was going to sit between two of the biggest. The San Andreas Fault on the San Francisco side, and the Hayward Fault on the Oakland side.
San Francisco turned to veteran bridge builder Charles Purcell.
So Charles Purcell was the bridge engineer for Caltrans.
He'd sort of shepherded the project. If there was a name that you went to for the Bay Bridge, it was Purcell.
Purcell's first call was to break the job up into more manageable segments.
So the distance between San Francisco and Oakland is about 7 miles, but you have islands in the middle.
Yerba Buena Island was the perfect spot for two bridges to meet in the middle of the bay. Purcell would build one bridge from Oakland to the east side of Yerba Buena, and another bridge from San Francisco to the west side of the island.
Over on the west side, they need to maintain a very wide open shipping channel.
So the Navy was a big part of the planning for the original Bay Bridge. And the bridge had to be high enough on the San Francisco side so large ships could traverse in the event of a war.
Their only option was to build a suspension bridge. Since it only has 2 towers, a suspension bridge leaves a wide open channel. However, this particular channel was too wide for one bridge.
There was no precedent for building a suspension bridge at that length at that time. So this was what led Purcell to come up with this double suspension bridge concept, which was very good.
They decided on building twin suspension bridges.
Each span would require an anchorage at both ends. So Purcell had to build a central anchorage deep in the bay.
Because the anchorage that would bring these two bridges together out in the middle of the bay was going to be monolithic. There's more concrete in the center anchorage for the western side of the Bay Bridge than there is in the Empire State Building in New York.
From deep underwater to high above it, the men who built the Bay Bridge had to be fearless.
Gosh, that was a time before safety equipment, like hard hats were kind of a new thing that people would be wearing then.
There was no harness. They would walk the cable and they'd be 500 feet over the bay. The walkway that was put up was chain link fence. And the fact that it was 10 foot wide seemed like a huge luxury to this construction crew, which seems kind of crazy.
The towers on the Bay Bridge western span are 525 feet above the water. Fall off of that, it's going to be like hitting concrete.
The old footage from the construction just shows these men running across this chain link fence, and you're looking down 500 feet.
Back then, no rails on either side, no hard hats, just a ball cap on, and it looked like they were having the time of their life. and they were just tough. They were a tough breed of people.
And when those tough men reached Yerba Buena Island, they faced a whole new kind of challenge.
There was a big helper sitting out there on the bay called Yerba Buena Island. But once you got to that island, that's a very big rock.
The bad news is that to build over the top of the island would mean raising the bridge over 200 feet.
It made a lot more sense to drill a hole, but the hole that they were going to have to drill was going to be very, very big.
You would never think, let's just build a tunnel through Yerba Buena Island, but it was the lesser of evils.
It's actually the largest bored tunnel in the world at the time, and this is one of the first times we have boring machines to work with, and the reason it had to be so wide and so high is it's a double-decker tunnel.
The bridge was double-decked, so the tunnel had to be 2 levels as well.
There was no precedent for the size of this thing, nearly 80 feet wide, 60 feet high, and it would be a double-decker tunnel. And so there was really no option using the conventional techniques.
On the east side of the bay, Purcell designed a cantilever bridge and a series of short trusses.
And you have these tiny short spans that work because you don't have to accommodate shipping because you've already done it on the other side.
The problem on this side was building a foundation.
The bay isn't extraordinarily deep, but it's muddy. And so you really can't support a bridge on mud.
Like over 300 feet of bay mud.
So that bridge is built on timber piles.
Instead of another concrete foundation, Purcell created a wood foundation. He sank giant trees deep into the mud.
So it's wood that the old bridge sat on. They're like telephone poles. So they drove timber piles almost 200 feet down, which was unheard of.
In the end, Purcell's masterpiece was actually a collection of creative solutions. They built twin suspension bridges, a monolithic central pier, a double-decker tunnel, a cantilever bridge, and a series of truss bridges.
They were dealt a hand, and they dealt with it really remarkably.
The bridge built on timber piles lasted for half a century, until the ground beneath those timbers shook.
The timber piles, the concrete piers, the riveted truss are all going to play a role in what happens in 1989.
One spot in particular, Pier E9, where the different types of trusses were joining together, that they tried to accommodate 4 to 6 inches of movement in case of an earthquake. It wasn't going to be enough.
1141. We have a 50-foot section which is collapsed from westbound into eastbound.